you know, when people say to me, well, it'll just be highly divisive, you know, you've got to take that very seriously. On the other hand, I think we are divided. You know, there's no point in, you know, pretending that we're not. And I think there's also a huge risk, and this is my fear at the moment, is that we leave without having decided our future relationship with Europe, which, by the way, we were promised we would be able to know that before we left. And then the public thinks, well, we've left, now that's closure, so I'm not going to hear about Brexit again. And this time next year, they're still hearing about it because we hadn't decided the future relationship before we left. And one of the things that's very difficult here, very, very difficult, is there's a huge gap right now between the feelings of people in Parliament and the public. The public thinks, what are these guys talking about? You know, they should just get on and do it. And the MPs are doing, in fact, what they should do in a parliamentary democracy. They're studying the detail. And when they're studying the detail, they're saying, you know what, this is not sensible. And it's in particular not sensible to leave before you have some clarity over the future relationship. Is it a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit? Now, the reason why at present the government doesn't want to resolve that question is that the cabinet itself is fundamentally divided. But it's incredibly dangerous for the country to leave Europe with the cabinet unresolved as to the future relationship, because then after you leave, you're just going to carry on with the same debate over the future relationship. And by then you'll have left, you'll have no bargaining power and no right of return, as it were. You're then locked into it.
What's your answer? Who is going to occupy the centre ground? Are we going to see a new party, a new type, or a new style? This worry about Brexit spilling over into violence on the streets, do you share that view?
I mean, let these guys go and stand in an election. If they win, then take them seriously. But why should you take them seriously because they're putting bricks through shop windows? It's ridiculous. And you need politicians that are strong enough to stand up and say this. You know, someone's going to threaten violence if you go back and ask them again. I actually think there's another reason, by the way, why I think a second referendum in the end is the only way to go for this reason. The truth of the matter is, it's the only way to bring closure. You see, Theresa May's strongest card at the moment is, get this thing over and done with. Turn the corner. That's her strongest card. The problem is her deal doesn't turn the corner. You're going to be in the same stretch of road after March 2019 because you haven't resolved the future relationship. And that's the problem. So this is if you want to bring closure, you've got to have a referendum with a specific, and I think effectively it will be a hard Brexit versus Remain, and you've got to have you've got to have the fight, you've got to agree on both sides, doesn't matter what the result is, however narrow, that's it, end of it.
So who's going to...
Thanks, Tony. I suppose where I am is that businesses are...
So you're then in a situation where if we get clarity, which is what we should have before we leave, it'll be clarity around a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. A hard Brexit being a free trade type of agreement like Canada, the soft Brexit being like Norway. Now, at that point, business has got to educate people as to what those choices mean. You know, because obviously if you stay in the single market and stay in a customs union, then the economic damage is much less. But, I mean, frankly, I think the British people will say in those circumstances, well, why on earth are we leaving then? Because we've left the decision-making room, but we're still abiding by the decisions. If we go for a hard Brexit, which I think is much more likely if we leave on these terms, I think it's much more likely that after March 2019, the Brexiteers take a grip on the Conservative Party and really roll them towards a hard leave. And frankly, a hard leave is what the British public that voted Brexit are much more inclined to go for. At that point, it will be really important for business to say, OK, but here's the choice. Now, I hope that all of that happens before we leave. Because if it happens after we leave, I think people are going to be really quite upset when they realise what's going on. But if it happens before we leave, yes, at that point, it's going to be really important for business just to spell out, these are the consequences.
Do you think business...